Hi friends, Lorelei Black here from Blade Broom. Thank you so much for joining me this week as we talk about the talking board or the spirit board, or as it is often known, the Ouija board. And we're going to talk about how that is a very specific name of a type of board. So stick around. Before we get too far in, I want to do that YouTube reminder thing where I say that if you are enjoying the content and would like to see more, make sure that you subscribe and click the bell, and then that way you'll get notifications. I'm sure you already know that, but I feel compelled to say it. The other thing that I'd like to remind everybody about is that I have lots and lots of links and resources and Book of Shadows pages or grimoire pages that I've written that are available to you down in the description box. So if that is of interest, you can find additional articles to read about this particular topic, and you can find things that I've written about the topic that go into more depth. Included in what you'll find down there is a link to the Red Thread Academy of Traditional Witchcraft, which is a way to study the type of witchcraft that I practice in depth, and including some online interaction with other people that are studying all across, not just across the country, but across the world. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And if you want to check out all of the writing and activities that I get up to, check out my link tree, which is also down there. Okay, enough of the reminders. Let's get started. And I'm going to go down low for this. So a little tiny bit of history on talking boards. The talking board itself is a very old tool that really predates the phrase or the name Ouija. Part of sort of the legend, and I don't know if it's actual lore or if it's a marketing technique that one of the particular people involved with popularizing the board early on had shared, was that a spirit with whom they were communicating identified that as the name of the board or the name of that spirit. And so they started marketing the board with Ouija or Ouija on the top, and it has stuck. It's like calling facial tissues Kleenex, right? Or a pocket lighter a Bic. It might not be made by Bic, it might not be made by Kleenex, it might not be technically a Ouija board, and it can still be a talking board. So the only ones that are really Ouija boards are the ones that say Ouija on them. The rest are more appropriately called a talking board or a spirit board. Now we first see the talking board, something like the talking board, in about 1100 AD in China. There's a system there that's called Fuji Planchette writing. And this was seen as a version of automatic writing, but it involved a planchette. This is one of the first examples of a planchette-based lettered or pictographic spirit communication system. We don't really see it in Western culture until somebody is writing about the fact that there was a talking board or a spirit board in use at a spiritualist camp in Ohio in 1886. And we see it being used as a tool in seance there for spirit communication. By 1890, there was a talking board that was being marketed by a novelty company, a toy company, a game company, basically. And it was pretty popular as a parlor game throughout the Victorian era. It wasn't seen as harmful or dangerous or anything that you shouldn't be messing with. Of course, during that time, there was a lot of interest in spiritualism and in contacting spirits and talking with spirits, and that wasn't seen as satanic or even related to demonology or anything along those lines. It wasn't until much later that the board sort of got a bad reputation, mostly from religious sources. And so we start seeing lots of references to the board as as being a gateway for demonic possession. We see it in horror movies. There are lots and lots of horror movies that involve the talking board, and it's sort of all wrapped up into the satanic panic. What happened after that point, I think, once it started having this sort of tinge around it of the dangerous, people started using it to be dangerous, to be edgy, and to scare themselves. And if you come onto a talking board with the intention of talking, even if it's a deep sort of buried intention, but like you're hoping to be titillated, hoping to be a little bit frightened, like that's something that you expect as part of the experience, there are definitely spirits out there who are very willing to help you out. And so teenagers would play with this. Sorry, teens, not trying to like call you out here, because I was once a teenager who wanted to be scared by a Ouija board too. It's a thing. It's a thing in our culture now that people who are inexperienced with contacting spirits, don't have much information about how to work safely with such a thing, reach out, make themselves available, and then have a legitimately bad experience on the board. And of course, that just ends up being this sort of loop of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you expect something bad to happen with your spirit work, it probably will, because you're bringing that in almost as a request, as a precursor, as a set expectation of the experience. If, on the other hand, you are very comfortable with working with spirit, working with energy, working magic, and you know that you've got the skills and the tools to be able to handle pretty much any situation that comes up, you're very rarely, if ever, going to have a negative experience on a talking board. You might have a spirit that shows up that you don't want to talk to, you know, somebody that the energy just feels yucky, and maybe even they say things that are aggressive. But honestly, it's a lot like having a stranger on the internet slide into your DMs with some bullshit that you don't want to hear or don't want to be talking about, you know, pics of their genitalia, or dropping comments in your public spaces, you know, on your timeline or in your feed, saying something nasty and negative. All you got to do is block them, right? Like, we know that with the internet, where these invisible entities, because that's really what a lot of other people end up being for us on the internet, we might have a picture of them, but we don't ever meet them face to face. So having these unseen entities coming into our etheric or energetic internet space with some hate and nastiness, we know how to get rid of them. We block them. We also know that if we feed the trolls, they keep coming back. It is exactly the same on the board. It is exactly the same when we're working with spirits. Don't feed the trolls. Don't engage with a spirit that feels wrong to you or that says something that you don't like. Take a very hard stance and say, get out. Or go through something like a banishing, in which you use Florida water, angel water, or Venus water as it is called. Also, where you clear with incense smoke. Maybe you even go into a full-on ritual practice like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram or the star ruby. Or you might use a phrase like Hecus o Hecus este bebeloi, or Apapantos kakadaimenos. And both of those basically mean, get the fuck out of here, you nasty asshole. One of the first things that I recommend is always using the talking board with some kind of sacred space in place. That's going to vary a lot depending on what tradition you practice, if you have a particular tradition of magic that you're working with, or with the systems that you've developed for yourself, or whether or not you even identify as a witch, magician, or as a Christian who's just trying to interact with the spirit world. I personally use and recommend a sphere and pyramid type concept, which is sort of a three-dimensional, or actually multi-dimensional, way of approaching the circle and triangle that are often described in classical grimoires. So you see this in things like the Ars Goetia or the Lemegeton, the Lesser Key of Solomon, the Legion. Those are all referencing the 72 spirits of the Goetia. And in those works and in other works on demonology or spirit contact, because remember, I can't say it enough, demon just means spirit in Greek. It didn't mean good spirit, it didn't mean bad spirit, it just meant a spirit. It could be literally any kind of not fleshy, not physical being with whom you were contacting. Eros, the god of lust, Aphrodite's son, is referred to as a daemon, a demon. It was that thing that happens when one religion is dominating an area and taking over and trying to subjugate the other religions, where they refer to all of their spirits, all of their gods, as demons and devils. So in the classical grimoires from the Middle Ages, and there are a lot of them, there are often these accounts of different spirits and how to work with them. And one of the things that we see over and over again is the use of a circle and triangle, or as I like to promote the idea, a sphere and pyramid. Now, if you're a witch working within a witchcraft tradition, you probably already have a way that you cast your circle or lay your compass, and that's great. Use it. Do that every time before you actually work with the spirit on the talking board. And go a step further to create that pyramid so that the spirit has its own space and has a place to manifest, but it's also a little bit separate from you. While you're doing that, you might be asking the other kinds of spirits that you work with, either your familiar deities, land spirits, family spirits, ancestral spirits, whoever it is that you work with, you can ask them to keep a watchful eye and to be there as your protection. And that's going to give you a great amount of security and safety as you work. Another one of the tips that I have is don't ever call on a spirit through something that's so easy to communicate with, like a spirit board, where what you want is to be titillated. You've been talking about how dangerous and scary it is. You've been talking about people's bad experiences on the talking board. If that's the mindset that you're coming from, just expect that something unsavory is probably going to happen. If, however, you are genuinely interested in talking with a particular spirit or with a helpful spirit that can help guide you through a problem that you're having, provide answers to questions that you have, that type of thing, then this might be the right time for you to start working with it. Another tip is to only ever work with a partner that you can trust, or with spectators present that you can trust. I tend to like to work on the board in either a one-on-one partnered kind of experience or by myself. And I've done this with like my coven present, and also at festivals or events where a seance was part of the working that was happening. Sometimes the board is a great way to do that because you've got the energy from those people and they have questions, they have spirits that they want to contact. But I don't like to have multiple hands on the board. I like just for me and my partner, or just myself alone, to be touching the board, because it can get really unfocused when you have all those people. And I really prefer and really strongly advocate that, especially when you're new at this, do it only with somebody who you trust, that they're not calling somebody unfriendly, or that they're not looking to get the oogie-boogies from the experience. Because again, the spirits, if you don't have a gatekeeper spirit already in place, which is a spirit who helps you connect with and contact other spirits, but also keeps out the negative ones, they kind of act as a bouncer for you. If you don't have that kind of spirit already in place for yourself yet, you have to rely on yourself to do that. And that's going to be harder to do if you're working with somebody who's looking for the shock value. Another tip is to be prepared to banish. You need to know how to do that. You need to know how to cleanse and clear an area before working, and how to forcefully remove a spirit if you need to. So I'm a mom of now almost grown-ass people. Let's see. So I'm a mom of now almost grown-ass people. My daughter is 21 and in college. My son's about to turn 18 and graduate from high school. So, um, I have that mom voice. I have that parental authority tone. And a lot of you watching this are probably going to have that as well. I also was a teacher for several years of high school students. So I also have that teacher voice. If you don't have the parent voice or the teacher voice, if you don't have the bouncer voice, the security guard voice, develop it and get used to being able to be the person in charge. Because when you're working with spirits or you're working in a magical setting, there are you need to be largely in control of yourself and your environs. You need to be able to say, I've had about all of this that I can stand and it's time for you to fucking go. And for that spirit on the other side, if you're dealing, hopefully you would never say that if you weren't dealing with a nasty spirit, but that spirit on the other side to go, oh shit, she means business. You're not a victim. You're not easy prey. Banishing can be as easy as just saying, it's time for you to go now. I don't want you here. Get out. And I'll be honest, I've said phrases like that or similar and had it be very effective. I don't always turn to Apapantos Kakadaimenos or Hekes o Hekes este Bibeloi, or pulling out the full star ruby, for instance. However, I do have those things all in my back pocket. So if I need them, I can use them. For me, there's a little bit of the idea of levels of force embedded in this. If I can get a spirit to go just by saying, go away now, you're not welcome here anymore, then I'll use that. If I need to use a magical formula in Greek, I will use that. If I need to jump all the way into a star ruby, which is an entire ritual in Greek, or the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, which is in English and has some Latin phrases in the mix, then I'll use those. But to me, those are the big guns, and I'm not going to go and do that, which is probably going to shut down the entire talking board session when just saying, hey, you, get out of here. I want to talk to somebody that is actually about this in a helpful way. In my mind, those bigger ritual pieces for banishing are kind of nuclear options because it's going to shut down the whole session and you're just done. But sometimes that's what you want, right? Like you're like, nope, no more of this, close it down, we're going home. The last specific piece of advice that I'm going to give is to be specific when you're calling a spirit. If you can, call on a specific spirit and use their sigil if they have one that's, you know, recorded in those lists of spirits, those demonologies that I mentioned before. You know, have somebody in mind that you're trying to call, as opposed to just going onto the party line and asking for anybody. And as a part of the call to them, let them know what it is that you're needing from them. If you don't have somebody, if you don't have a particular spirit that you're trying to contact and you're just reaching out to the great beyond, which is a thing, I mean, you can do that, that's not terrible, still try to be really specific about the kinds of spirits that you are open to having come to you. I would say something like, I call into the unseen and ask for guidance and wisdom from a spirit who would help me, one with whom I have affinity and who does not intend me harm. Something like that is pretty much going to always get you a spirit that you're going to be compatible with because you specifically asked for that, and is going to rule out the possibility of an actually truly negative, nasty spirit coming through. The worst that you could get in that situation, the worst that I've ever experienced, is kind of a neutral spirit whose energy feels when we're talking about alignments, feels sort of true neutral. Um, Being in the presence of that true neutral can be a little unnerving. You get the sense that they're there and that they'll tell you things and they'll tell you the truth and they'll help you, but you don't exactly know what their end game is, if they're doing it to be helpful or to help you out or because it's in your best interest, or if they're like, well, this is true information, it's gonna blow up your fucking world, but I brought my popcorn, so it's cool. So those are my basic tips and principles for working safely or properly with the talking board. And I feel like if you do these things, these 5 really pretty easy concepts, you're not going to run into the kinds of high drama that you see in horror movies or that you have undoubtedly had friends tell you that they've experienced. Maybe even that you've experienced yourself in the past when you went onto the board looking to be ooked out. So now let's take a few minutes to look at the mechanics of actually using a talking board and what that experience can be like, because while it is very easy to use and it's pretty straightforward, sometimes there are peculiarities or idiosyncrasies that will happen between you and your spirit and the board. So I mentioned earlier that you ought to put the board in a triangle. So the triangle is representative of a 3-dimensional structure that is a pyramid. That pyramid has been used, that pyramidal shape has been used across world cultures as a way to bridge the gap between this world and other worlds, and as a way for various types of spirits, whether they are ancestral spirits or deity spirits or nature spirits or some other type of spirit that we're interacting with, to help them manifest into this world. So you can either make a triangle using something like a triangular piece of fabric that you've cut out or twigs that you've laid down in the shape of the triangle, or other implements that you use in your witchcraft that might be, you know, sort of that straight line but small-ish. So if you have, for instance, a mini stang or a kepin, wands, those might all be things that you might use. You could do it with ribbon or with shells or with stones or literally anything, some combination of all of the above. Or one of the things that I have just recently made the connection with is that if I'm working on the board just by myself, I like to place it on my lap while I'm sitting crisscross applesauce. And I thought, well, wait a second, that's not, that's not creating that triangular shape. But if you actually look down at your legs, it very much is creating that triangle. So the principle still applies. You're just using your own body for that work. I'll put the board on my lap if I'm working just by myself, or if I'm working with a partner, the board will be between us and there'll be that triangle around it. If I'm working with a planchette, I will place the planchette on the board and give it a moment until I feel something. If I've already done the invitation or the evocation, then there should be at least one spirit present. For me, this is usually my gatekeeper spirit, who will be right there. She's always the first one to say anything at all on the board. It doesn't matter if I'm working by myself or with somebody else. My gatekeeper is superiorly strong and very well suited to this work, and she always just sort of takes over. I will usually see some indication that she is present. Typically she'll slide to the letter S. And then I'll ask as a confirmation, is this S my familiar spirit or is this another spirit? And usually she'll either slide back around to the S or go up to yes. As a point of clarity in your readings and your discussions, if you're asking a yes or no question, you don't want to follow it up with another yes or no question before the spirit has had a chance to answer, like I just did in my example. You know, I said, is this S or is this another spirit? Often what happens is the spirit will just kind of be stuck between, like, am I supposed to answer the first one first or the second one first? Or I don't, So you'll kind of feel this almost like twitching in the board of like, I don't know where to go. Try to ask one question at a time. If you're asking yes or no questions, give them a chance to get there. If you're asking a more open-ended question like, who is this? Give them a chance to spell out the name. Or in the case of my familiar spirit, she tends to just go straight to that letter S. And that has been a way that I've known her since the beginning of our work together. She would bounce between S and yes, even to answer in the affirmative. I work with another spirit pretty frequently that does something similar, but instead of bouncing between the word yes and a particular letter, for instance, that would be associated with her name, she'll actually go between yes and we on the board, which means yes in French. Ja means yes in German. So we've actually got 3 yeses right across the top of the board that your spirit may end up using to some end. So other interesting things that can happen on the board that sometimes freak people out and really shouldn't, because they're more like the spirit saying, I'm processing, or I'm trying to communicate something to you that isn't necessarily easily conveyed on the board, is that sometimes the planchette will run over all of the letters just sort of in this almost like a figure 8, or they'll kind of go just sort of back and forth across the board. And I would say that typically that is a hold please, I'm thinking, or hold please, I'm having a hard time conveying the idea that I want to share in relation to your question. It might also be, I have something to say to you that's different than the question you just asked. So you might want to rephrase your question or ask directly, is there something that you would like to share with me? If you started by asking a really open-ended question like that, though, is there something you'd like to share with me, and the spirit's just sort of running all over the board, then you might try narrowing it down, because maybe the spirit just showed up going, hey, I think I can be helpful, but then you don't have it. It'd be like calling your friend on the phone and saying, hey, buddy, is there anything that you'd like to let me know, or anything that like I should know going on? Your friend's going to be like, hold on. And in some ways they're going to be like, is this a trap? Did I do something? Do you think I did something? What's going on? So that can be a very confusing question if you think about it. If a spirit came in with no particular agenda or no particular thing to say, but can answer questions for you, you might want to just get into the questions. Another thing that happens pretty frequently, and yet it freaks a lot of people out, are that sometimes the spirit that you're talking to will just go between the letter A and the letter Z, and back to the letter A and Z, A, Z, A, Z. There are a couple of things that could be going on with that, because I've had different spirits do that, but I want to assure you that it's not some kind of harmful thing or a harmful spirit that's trying to communicate with you on the board. Again, this often happens when a spirit is trying to answer the question, what's your name, or who am I speaking with? It might be a spirit who has multiple names, or even many multiple names that they've been known by, and they're not necessarily always sure which name to give you right then. That can be a thing that's happening. It may be a spirit whose name starts with either the letter A or the letter Z. In the case of one of the spirits that I worked with, she identified herself this way. This is actually the same spirit that goes between yes and we. So in her case, she has 2 names. One that she went by in life, and the other that she would prefer for me and my coven to use. One of those starts with an A, and the other one starts with a Z. S in particular, if she's trying to think of what to say next, or very often if she's contacting another spirit or trying to put them through, especially if she's stepping aside to let them speak directly, because S does act as a gatekeeper spirit. I picture her as sort of bridging the gap between this world and the world of spirit. Some spirits will use the opening in the planchette, if there is one, to indicate the letter or the graphic image or the phrase that they're trying to convey to you, and some spirits will use the pointer part of the planchette. This is especially true if there is no sort of hold opening on the planchette, um, but some spirits just like the pointy bit. So take some time as you're first communicating with a new spirit to get a feel for the way that they move the planchette and what they're pointing at. There's some lore around how a talking board session should end. Some people say that you have to wait for the spirit to tell you goodbye. Um, and while I feel like that is a very polite thing to do, it is not always a true thing. So it's like having a conversation with a friend. You're on the phone with somebody. Um, you don't typically hang up before they've had a chance to say goodbye. However, if it's one of those situations where, the telemarketer has called you and you don't want to have that conversation, you might do the thing where you say, "No, thank you, I'm really not interested. Please take my name off your list. Goodbye," and hang up before they've had a chance to actually acknowledge you or to say their thing. And honestly, in the case of telemarketing, their thing is usually to counter your objections and to try to get you to stay on the phone. A spirit might do that too, right? So if you're wanting to just shut it down, you can say, "Go away, it's time for us to be done," and do a banishing and just shut it down. But if you're talking to a spirit with whom you've had some rapport and the feelings are generally very good and positive, then you probably want to give them the chance to go, "Oh yeah, okay, I don't have anything else to say either. Goodbye." But that doesn't mean that you can't initiate that farewell and say, "I think I'm done now. I'm pretty tired. I don't have any more questions. Unless you have something else to say, it's time for us to wrap up." Very often then the spirit will just move the planchette down to goodbye and be gone. All right, friends, that's all I have on this, I think. I've written more about working with talking boards, and in the May issue of Evoke publication, I'm actually going to be posting an article there about working with the talking board that will reiterate a lot of these things and give them to you in a written format that you can keep, but also explore some other ideas in a little bit more depth. So take a look at that and drop comments. If you liked this video, like the video, and let me know what your experiences have been and what questions you have by dropping a comment down below. All right, friends, I'll see you next week on Monday. Bye.